and we are being recorded.
Yes.
My title is Senior Business Strategist, and I work for CATIC, that's Connecticut Attorneys Title Insurance Company. And I've been in the title insurance industry for, I'm coming up on 20 years. I started in 2005, and I got into the business right out of college. I did not even know what title insurance was, really. I just needed a job. And through a network of applications and job interviews, I ended up getting referred to John Ford of Lawyers Title. I mean, he retired some years back, but he hired me into the business, and I had really no idea. This whole world that we're going to be talking about today was completely foreign to me. So I ended up doing about 15 years worth of underwriting. And now I've kind of stepped off the front line. I still underwrite, but I'm really focused now on emerging technologies, market trends, all of the disruption that we've got out there right now. Maybe we'll talk about that in the discussion. But these are things that as a strategist, I'm really trying to keep CATIC a step ahead. And that is easier said than done when there's so many changes. But it's also a really exciting time to be in the business. So I think we're going to have a great conversation today. Julie, why don't we just start with you? Julie Barrel, did I get your last name right? Is it Barrel?
Yes.
How about you just introduce yourself, say where you work, and how did you get into the business?
Sure. I'm Julie Burrell, and I am quality control manager for Norcom Mortgage. I've been here for about 5 years, or excuse me, going on 7 years. I was underwriting for 5 years. And then I took over about 2 years ago, the quality control department. I've been in the business about 20 years now as well, same as Zach. And sort of the same as Zach, I got out of college and I actually bought my first condo. I was about 20 and I needed a job as well. So I wanted to get into the mortgage business. I went into sales, didn't even know how to calculate a debt ratio. And so the first office I went into, they hired me and trained me. And I was in sales ever since, until I started wanting to kind of get my head in the files and sort of get more on the back end of things. And that's when I went more into underwriting, and I was head of credit for a portfolio lender, a jumbo portfolio lender for a while, and before I came to Norcom. And here I am.
Wow, that's fascinating. I guess I maybe didn't, you might have mentioned it before, but I guess it might have went right over my head that you also have a background in underwriting. That's really interesting.
Yes.
All right, John Francis, how about we do the same with you? Just explain where you're from, where you work, and how did you get into the business?
Sure. Yeah, thanks. So I'm John Francis. I'm the secondary market and post-closing manager at Newtown Savings Bank. So I started my career in this field working for a mortgage pipeline hedging company, and actually got into it the summer of 2008, which was a very interesting time to jump into the industry. But so I did that for about 5 years. I was actually doing that while I was working my way through college. Then when I graduated, I got a job at Liberty Bank. And about almost 2 years ago, I moved to Newtown Savings Bank. And within about 8 months, I got bumped up to manager. My former manager left. It was a bittersweet moment because I had a very good relationship with her. And they gave me the management position. And then within, I want to say less than a year, they handed post-closing to me as well. So, I've been very fortunate in my in the short time I've spent at Newtown Savings Bank. But I think I have a pretty good understanding of the secondary market, which I always tell my team, we're in a good position because From our perspective, you really get to understand the why of things, right? And that's I think that's really important in this business. So I think it's going to help me get where I am.
The why of things. Yeah, that is really important in our business. And it takes a while to really kind of get your sea legs and understand all the little variables that are at work in this industry, so that you can gain insight in that area. So welcome, and I'm sure we're going to have an interesting discussion with you. And then lastly, we've got Peter McGillis. And Pete, we work, the company where you work, I'll let you introduce yourself and the company, but it's a CADIC affiliate. So Peter and I are affiliated. And take it away, Pete. How did you get into the business?
Thank you, affiliate. So the company I work for is called Universal Component Lender Services. We're actually a mortgage servicing shop. We're a startup, so we have only been around since July of last year is when we first came on board. We started as a company of 3. We're up to about 20 people now, and we have plans to go live in the next couple of months. And once we do, we're going to grow expeditiously. Fingers crossed. But
what's that been like? You know, I'm assuming that you probably have worked at other companies in the space before, and now you're really kind of like starting one from scratch. What has that been like?
It's been a learning experience for sure. It's Zach, as you and I have talked before, it's this chicken and egg game where you're trying to build your company while also bring in new business, and it's sometimes tough to pitch people. I say all, a few of us were down in Orlando last week for the MBA servicing conference and talked to a lot of good people and prospects and partners, and it's always difficult to try to explain what you're doing when you have no business yet in place, and they want referrals, and they want to know how big your company is and how many loans you're currently servicing, and well, the answer is 0. So the
answer is technically 0, but it's like you all know what you're doing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and that's what we do. We sell our expertise. We sell, we've got quite a bit of experience on our executive team. So gentleman Rick Smith, who's our president, my boss, he's built 3 different mortgage companies from the ground up. So he's done this plenty of times before and has a proven track record. So we're confident that everything is going to fall into place. We just have to be patient and keep fighting the good fight. But I've been doing mortgage stuff. I've been in the mortgage business since 2008. I actually joined right around the same time as John, right out of grad school at UConn. And I'm definitely the old guy on the panel, but so I started off with Nation Star Mortgage, which is now Mr. Cooper. They're one of the big mortgage servicers and correspondent lenders that's out there. And that was again
with Nation Star. Yeah.
Yep, that was down in Dallas in 2008, and so I started there, and I've done just about everything there is to do in mortgage, from finance to originations to oversight to back end stuff. I ran servicing and originations, compliance and risk, and right then my last position before joining UCLS was running strategy, Zach, just like you. So all the good guys get into strategy at some point in their career for another servicer called Fay. And then Rick called me up and said, Pete, would you be interested in helping me start this new company? And I said, let's do it. So came over last summer, and it's been a ride ever since.
Well, thanks. This is going to be fascinating. I think, this is the first that I realized that, and this includes me, I think our whole panel, we seem to have come into the business right around the same time. And what's striking is we may be the generation that is really kind of post great financial crisis, and I can't help but think that has affected our mentality in some way and how we look at the job. So we'll see if some of that comes out. So really the format that we're going to follow today is, we'll start off with Julie and talk a bit about her space, which is quality. And then we'll move on to John, and John's going to give us, he's going to work in another layer, which is, what does quality do versus post closing, and what's the difference there, and what's going on, and then I think it'll transition well to Pete's space, which is servicing. So, and there's going to be overlap, and what we were thinking would lend itself to a good discussion is, we'll focus on Julie, but if there's some overlap and there's some aspect that touches John or Pete's space, John and Pete, feel free to chime in and make a comment. And also maybe what we could do is, if folks have questions, feel free to interrupt us or shout them out. And if we get bogged down, then we can start holding them until the end. But I think we could just have a little bit of a free flowing conversation today. And, as people have things to contribute, feel free to speak up.
Hey, Zach, Julie just messaged me. If I interrupt her, then I'm in trouble. So I'm going to.
Okay. All right. So we'll try to keep Julie on track here. And so, Julie, you mentioned last week that you're focused on manufacturing quality loans to prevent post-closing issues. And like I mentioned, my background is in underwriting, which underwriting occurs before the closing. So I've often wondered, what are some of the issues that start popping up in post-closing? And so I'm wondering if you could elaborate on that. Manufacturing quality loans and preventing post-closing issues.
Yes, so there's many issues that come up post-closing, to answer your question, and obviously there's so much to going into manufacturing a quality loan, so that's why so many things can come up post-closing, which is why my main goal is to, like I say, sort of create a culture of quality. Everyone that touches that loan has a hand in that, so from beginning to end. And the use of technology, if we want to talk about that, my other main focus is prevention. So the underwriting obviously is a big factor in prevention. Hopefully things don't get past the underwriter, but sometimes they do. So that's when we try to collect all the data and try to figure out what's trending, what's missing, and how we can fix it.
So what I gather from that is you do a lot of analysis.
Yes.
So maybe we could start with the technology piece. And how do you gather data? Because eventually you want to be able to analyze the data, but can you talk a little bit about what's the process generally for gathering that data? You used a word in our conversation last week, day one certainty. Does that factor into how the process works?
Day one certainty factors into, again, that use of technology for prevention. Obviously, use of day one certainty has so many other advantages, but day one certainty, things like Loan Beam, which calculate income for you for those complex borrowers with tons of properties or tons of businesses, use of those and getting rep and warrant relief from the GSEs is huge in preventing defects. As far as gathering the data, though, to answer your question, we use a technology called ACES Quality Management. Some companies are, bogged down with a lot of Excel spreadsheets. I don't know how that works, but I've been fortunate to come into this great, robust technology which gathers all the data for us using the various taxonomies of HUD, USDA, VA, and the GSEs.
And is that technology that's used to gather data, has that been evolving over the last decade or so, or has this been a mainstay of the process since you've been involved?
I think it's definitely been evolving, and more lenders are starting to see that they have to use some sort of technology to have a robust QC program. I do think that it's continuing to evolve. We're testing with integrations through the ACEs system. This wasn't a sale on ACEs today, but it is a great company. And I've been involved in a lot of the testing of various integrations with them. So it's definitely constantly evolving. I have no other experience with other quality control management companies. I know they're out there and they're always knocking on my door. But so yes, to answer your question, definitely, I think that they're evolving and they'll continue to.
Yeah, I mean, as I'm hearing you just describe how you do things, the sense is that technology is part of the culture at Norcom. And that just knowing some of your colleagues, I would say that's true. Norcom seems to be a technology forward company to me. And so I am intrigued on how you build that kind of culture. That's something that as a strategist, I think about a lot, is how do we build a culture that's going to help Caddick be sustainable. We've been around for about 60 years and we would love to be around for another 60. But changing or building a culture is, from my perspective, it's pretty hard. And so I'm just wondering, do you have any insight that you can share on how do you build a technology forward culture? How do you build a good culture just in general? Is there anything that you can, any insight you can give?
So technology and building that culture in quality, I think, are two different things. We are constantly pushing the use of technology and helping our staff to adapt to, the changes, because if we don't use the technology, we are going to fall behind. And I know we have people in our industry that have been around a long time and we don't like change. But it's important to embrace change, embrace the technology, and we try to use that sort of concept here. And as far as building a quality culture, I feel like that's something I'm still working on here.
Aren't we all?
We do, we care. I know everybody cares, and everybody tries to do their best here and do a good job. And but I think just continuously communicating. I think communication is the most important thing, and not really being shy about it. If there's areas that need fixing, we have to put an action plan in place and focus on that. And that's really it.
Hey,
So
Julie,
it seems like, oh yeah, go ahead, Pete.
Yeah, I was just going to ask about culture and how much of it as a leader over there at Norcom do you see it starting from the top? Because in my experience, that cultural piece is usually led from the top, right? So if your leaders, your managers are the ones that initiate those concepts and then sort of lead through, or what's the term I'm looking for? Lead through example.
Right.
And so how have you and working with Phil and all the other leaders there at Norcom initiated or implemented your core values and your other techniques to build that culture outside of just quality? Obviously that's important, but the overall culture and the buy-in from your employees and from your team and your customers, right? How does that start from the top and work its way down? Do you guys have noted core values or geez, my brain's drawing a lot of blanks this morning, but how does that filter down through the team?
So you're right, it does start with the top. I meet with Phil often, and we constantly go over what's going on. We meet monthly with all of the management team and talk about what's going on. We talk about the industry trends, what we need to be aware of and sort of get ahead of. Oftentimes what I do is I put a dollar sign on it. What's it going to cost? What are these defects costing us? What are any repurchases costing us? And sometimes that often trickles down to everyone. Well, we don't want to be the reason or the cause for any losses.
That's really interesting, Julie, because I find myself having similar conversations with our CEO, Jim Sapiga, where I might identify that there is an enterprise risk, or maybe there's an opportunity, and it would help keep CADC a step ahead if we adjusted to that, or maybe went after the opportunity. And because culture is affected so much by top down, I just think that that insight is really salient. I find myself having similar conversations where, what do I need to do to be influential here on my superiors? Because I look at it this way: it's less about what I want and what's best for our organization and what's best for our customers. And if we can identify something that's clearly value added, given that culture might be hard to change, if it's something new, a lot of thought has to be put into how am I framing this up for the management, the leaders, because it matters how that it trickles down, like Pete was saying. So yeah, attaching a dollar sign to it, or another tactic that I use is highlighting a risk too. If we don't change or if we don't adapt, I think you said it, we get left behind, and that's another point that I might try to make there.
Well, I was saying, it's gonna, at some point, I would think it would affect your relationships with our investors, the agencies. We have to continuously keep our quality up. We report monthly. Those reports go out to all of our investors. So we have to keep those looking good. So there's that.
So you mentioned something a second ago about macro or about following trends, and I'm wondering, how do you do that? What's your way that you use macroeconomic trends in defaults, for example, in your analysis?
We definitely look at what's going on in the country, what's going on in the whole world. So for a couple of examples, obviously we looked at the unemployment rates when they plummeted and what happened after that, when everyone sort of did go back to work, and what's happening right now in the country. It's really a worker's market out there. So a lot of people are leaving their jobs. So when we're looking at our mortgages, people are leaving their jobs right before closing. Not necessarily that they wouldn't qualify in a new job, but if our borrowers are not communicating with us, they leave their jobs. We don't know it until post-closing. Then we find out they weren't employed at the time at the job that they signed the application at closing. So things like that, that's when we're going to start hammering down on those verifications of employment prior to closing. And so, the job market analysis, that sort of thing. And inflation is huge right now. So I'm looking at who's taking cash out of false equity. Our market's gone up so much, it may not stay that high for very long. We don't want our borrowers underwater. So I'm looking at those appraisals and trying to get ahead of those trends.
Where do you think that's all headed? Do you see a trend there, or I know we're kind of switching over into a risk-on environment. We have geopolitical events that have really been disruptive over the last week with Russia and Ukraine, and we've had rising interest rates and inflation.
Right.
I'm just those are macroeconomic trends, I suppose.
Yes, so much.
Where do you see that all going? I'm curious.
Yes, there is so much going on. I don't see a huge crash in our values. I do see them sort of stabling out in the near future. So it's tough. It's tough to say. It's so volatile, and
yeah.
You listen to the news yesterday, you listen to it again today, and it's completely different.
It's like getting up every day and you really don't know what you're going to see in the news, and that makes it hard to make predictions. So from my perspective, what that means is, I can only speak for CADC, but I would imagine it's true most places. We have to be nimble. We have to be ready to adapt. And
it's so important to keep up.
Yeah.
Zach, I'm going to chime in real quick as the
sure, please.
as the pretend wannabe economist in the group and say that to add to what Julie's saying and talk about rates, which is important for all of us in the mortgage space. You know, treasuries the last few days, you're talking about the geopolitical risk have plummeted, which is a good thing for people like me who are trying to buy more properties. But you know, that certainly affects the value of servicing that we'll, you know, I think John's going to talk about a little bit later, and I'll touch on if need be. But it's certainly interesting times because everybody keeps talking about the rate environment, how rates are going up, 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 and you know the business is drying up for a lot of refi shops, and homes are becoming less and less affordable. Those prices go up, and now with rates going up at the same time. But this rate relief may also then turn around and have an impact because everybody's been preparing for a high rate environment. And now with the Russia-Ukraine situation, it just goes to show you never know what's going to happen. And again, to get on my horse of being a pretend economist, the long-term trend for rates, and everybody can write this down, this is my prediction, it's going to hold, and rates are not going to spike like a lot of people are predicting, at least not for the long term. So we may get rates in the 4.5–5% range for a short time, but I think the general trend of the last 30 years since the late 70s, well, I guess early 80s, has been a downward trend in rates from when they were up in the 15–20% range for the average 30-year fixed.
Well, certainly for the careers of everyone on the panel, that's been true. We've all basically been in a low rate environment for the past decade.
We always think it's going to get lower.
Yeah, I mean, we always anticipate things.
He probably saw 5% and thought, wow, that's never going to get better than 5%. Little did we know.
I came into sales when we were selling 7.25 on a 30-year fixed FHA. So I still feel like it's not going to be that high.
Yeah.
Well, Julie, when you're doing your SCRA checks and checking rates, you know, it used to be that 6% cap, right? So you always had to make sure that your SCRA loans were marked for active duty, and now 6%. Who wants a 6% interest on their 30-year mortgage? Ugh.
Well, yep. I'm with you, Pete. I think, you know, we may see short periods or periods of, you know, increasing rates, but I'm with you that I don't know that will necessarily always last very long, and it will hover. And beyond that, it's just hard to predict. But all right, so we're at 10:30. So how about we move on to John, just to kind of keep the conversation rolling. And John, you kind of you're sort of the link here between Julie and Pete, in that Julie's starting off with the concept of quality. And, you know, how about you explain a little bit about your position and how you've, you know, like you said, acquired post-closing. And can you explain the difference between a quality department or group and post-closing? What are those functions?
Yeah, so the way I usually like to explain it is, you know, the biggest difference is, you know, we execute a post-closing review of the loan, and then Julie's area does a quality control audit, right? Mm-hmm. So ours is supposed to be a little more of like a cursory review, but what I always like to tell my team is you want to find that balance of being thorough and efficient, right? And the better that we do our jobs, the easier it's going to be for someone to the quality control side for Julie's job, right? So much of it is, and a lot of those errors are going to get caught. You know, sometimes we're going to miss them, and they're going to get caught. But we serve as that kind of like that first line of defense before it gets to her. But the good thing is, even when they do get to her area, to the quality control area, it's a good retraining opportunity, right? And we can do the same thing. You know, as we catch you know, different defects. Hopefully, they're not defects. But because our job is typically to make sure that the loan closing is compliant and the loan is not defective and that it's saleable, right? And so
can I just interrupt you real quick, John? Can you explain what happens? So let's just start with the deal closes, right? So the deal closes, And then I'm imagining there's going to be a file of stuff. And that, does that make its way to you? I mean, is that generally what's happening there?
Yeah, so what most lenders will do is when a loan closes, we've also, if you've ever closed or bought a home, you got a stack of like 100 pages worth of stuff that you signed. And that package is going to get shipped typically to this area, to the post-closing area. And that's the real focus of their review, is to make sure that closing was compliant. And obviously there's other things that they're going to look at as well, right? We want to make, our team, we're not expected to be underwriters. That's not their responsibility, but there are certain pieces of the underwriting and the processing areas that we can look at and say, hey, it looks like you guys are missing this piece. But yeah, typically when that loan closes, that's coming right to us. And you could have, a lot of other states, they're having, they're doing electronic closings. I know the state of Connecticut is working on that as well. So sometimes, we can have, but we can do hybrid closings. So you can see, they're going to sign, most of that closing package electronically, and it can get delivered to us right away. But there's certain documents.
I have a question about that. I focus a bit on electronic closings, and yeah, I've been in some of those discussions lately. There's a lot of talking going on right now behind the scenes on trying to get a remote online notarization bill passed in Connecticut right now.
Yeah.
But what we can do, we're not able to do remote online notarization yet, but we can do hybrids, like you were saying, where part of the package has been signed using electronic signatures, and that might have been done remotely, and then part of the package is done, it's signed and executed in the traditional way with ink. What's the quality like on the electronic closing materials? Can you make any comment on that at all? Is it about the same as what you would normally get? Or is there any difference there? Is it worse? I mean, that's what I really want to know as a strategist. What's the stuff look like? Is it crapola, or is it, are we seeing good stuff?
Yeah. So one thing, and actually, getting feedback on this from the agencies as well. They actually are comfortable verifying. You can validate an electronic signature. What we can't do is we can't electronically deliver a wet signed note, because there's no way of them knowing that it was properly signed, right? They need somebody to actually look at that and say, hey, yes, this is the original note. But an electronic signature, they can validate that electronic signature. So there's actually no drop off. In fact, there's less of a drop off in quality, because it's all electronically. There's from a visual perspective, there's no issues with it. As Julie mentioned before, you want to keep up with technology, which to me is vital in our industry as a whole. You can really put yourself at a disadvantage if you don't keep up with that stuff. And this, I think, is a direction that the industry as a whole is going in. I think the pandemic may have accelerated it a little bit, when people were kind of forced to kind of keep a certain degree of separation. But it made us realize that, hey, maybe we can do something like this. Maybe there is, an opportunity here. And being able to validate those electronic closings, I think maybe set off a light bulb, like, hey, we can actually, we can execute a sale of a home this way.
I feel like what you're saying is really important, and it, in a lot of ways, I mean, I think it could be some of the most important information that's being put out there about electronically signed documents. Because I've been one of those folks that's been out there the past few years trying to convince people to try new things, be prepared. The world is changing. Let's reflect the world that we operate in. And boy, that has been hard. Going back to the conversation with Julie, culture can be really difficult to change. And one of the things that I would hear a lot is, how do we know this is safe? I don't trust the technology. And when I get a chance to speak with someone like you, and you're saying, well, there are security aspects to this that may even be better than what we had before, I find that really compelling. So thanks for the insight. And the thing is, that was kind of, we were sort of taking a tangent off of the original conversation, which is you were still describing, what post-closing and quality control does. So just to kind of get us back there, so you get a package, it's full of all those documents that were signed at the closing. What's the purpose of you doing the review? So you said we're not necessarily underwriting, but we are doing a review. And you even mentioned that, I mean, you might find yourself looking at deeds and copies of mortgages, and you're making sure that those documents look the way they should. How deeply do you go into your review?
Yeah, so I'm lucky enough. My post-closing team is they're very well versed in the industry. They really know the documents that they're looking at. And every document that gets signed at closing, there's a purpose to it, right? And sometimes it's to protect the borrower, sometimes it's to protect the seller, sometimes it's to protect the bank. And a lot of it is what it comes down to is making sure that it was signed correctly. And it's the majority of it is to make sure that the bank is or the lenders is making a big commitment, right, where they're giving out a lot of money. They want to make sure that they're protected, right, in case anything does go wrong. So in case of default, we can always look back and say, hey, you did sign this, and if it's not signed correctly, that could come back and haunt everybody.
Yeah,
and that's kind of where title work comes in as well.
In a default situation, right? In a foreclosure situation in Connecticut, yeah. I think we learned that in the last foreclosure crisis, which would have been, I don't know, like 2011 through about 2014 or 2015. If there are defects in the way those documents have been signed, that could cause all kinds of problems in that area, in defaults and foreclosures.
Yeah.
I think maybe the reason, and you can tell me if I'm right or wrong on this, probably one of the biggest reasons why all that is important, that we want to make sure that everything's signed correctly and you don't end up in big messes with foreclosures, is because you're selling some of these loans, right? Can you explain a little bit about this idea of what's loan saleability? What does that mean?
Yeah, so what most lenders, the idea of why we're able to lend out so much money is we're able to sell these loans into the secondary market, which kind of gets us that money back so we can go and lend out to more people.
And what's the secondary market?
I'm sorry, what?
What's the secondary market? Maybe just explain that real quick for anybody that might be, wondering.
So secondary markets, it's like a resale, right? So we're lending that money and then we're able to resell that debt to somebody else. And what we have to do is we have to make sure that loan is compliant from an underwriting perspective and a closing perspective to the person that's buying it, right? So they have their own guidelines. We need to make sure it meets those guidelines.
So these could be other institutions, or are these the actual investors themselves? I don't know, like I'm just gonna maybe like a real estate investment trust, or some big entity that buys mortgage-backed securities. Who are you interacting with there?
Yeah, so any lender, you could find any investor out there. Where the secondary market can be very robust. The deeper you look into it. But for the most part, what most lenders will do, they're going to sell their loans to the agencies, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, for FHA loans, Ginnie Mae. That's really the kind of the industry standard guideline, the agency guidelines.
So when you're dealing with the GSEs, don't they have like really, really robust standardized guidelines, and that's what you're trying to meet, right?
They do, and both of them are very good at staying on top of technology and really encouraging technology. They have an automated underwriting system, which Julie brought up. She brought up day one certainty, right? You can validate somebody's income, the value of their property and their assets all at once, and there's no reason you can't close that loan outside of in a 10-day span, outside of maybe TRID, the guidelines based on TRID regulations. The sooner you can close those loans, the sooner you can sell it to the secondary market and limit that risk that you have. So a lot of those a lot of those trends do trickle down from the agencies.
What are some of the biggest things that affect saleability? You know, like is there something that will happen and you're like, oh, okay, we got to pull this one out of the file and or out of the pile, and we got to fix this problem before we can sell the loan?
Yeah, it happens, right? So if let's say you have a note that was signed by only one person, it's the note wasn't signed correctly. That would obviously affect saleability. There's a lot of things that won't be caught until the agencies do their own quality, their own review of it. They'll say, hey, the debt to income was actually incorrect from the way you value, what you gave us. It's actually 47%, not 42%. This loan doesn't qualify, and that you could be putting yourself in a chance for repurchase. So that's why, the deeper your review is upfront before that loan is sold, the more important it is to catch those up front so you can fix them before the loan is sold. But yeah, a lot of that does come from the loan closing. Sometimes it could be title works. If the title is held in an LLC, that's a very different scenario. Oftentimes the GSEs look at those very differently.
I'm going to tell a dirty little secret about the title insurance industry right here. We got ourselves into trouble maybe, but it actually goes back to that foreclosure crisis, because people, or I should say institutions that owned these loans that were in default, were trying to deal with the situation at the time, and they were the institutions were going back and looking at their files and realizing there's no title insurance policy in here. And in the foreclosure crisis, we saw a lot of title issues. We just saw a lot of like documents not being executed properly. There was something called robo signing that was a really big problem. But that got us into trouble with the GSEs, and they came down on us pretty hard. They were basically like, title insurance industry, you've got to make sure that your title policies are getting into these loan packages so that we can avoid the post-closing problem in the default space. So it's just, from my perspective, I'm hoping that situation has gotten better, and that's not something that you see very often, like a missing title insurance policy.
No, I mean, sometimes attorneys can take their time in getting those title insurances back. But that is one of the most vital parts of that closing package, is making sure the title is there and it's held correctly, and that the bank and the borrower and everybody's protected accordingly. And obviously that can affect saleability as well. And these are things from a saleability perspective that we catch from the post-closing side. There's also different things out in the world that affect saleability as well. Different impactful moments, worldwide, a global pandemic, a war across the ocean, other side of the world. Those things affect the entire market. Maybe those note rates that we had 2 months ago that were maybe the low threes. If you were to try to sell a note rate like that right now, to one of the agencies, you're not going to make a lot of money on it. You're going to probably be underwater on it. So that's where, a really robust hedging strategy or selling strategy really comes in handy.
Wow, that adds a layer of complexity to the business. It sounds like you need smart people to do that kind of thing.
Luckily, I got a few of them.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so the last one, we'll transition over to Pete because we've got about 15 minutes. And I think this question will kind of help parlay over into Pete. So you've talked about saleability and what you're looking for as you're reviewing the package. You mentioned something to me last week. What's selling loans servicing released versus servicing retained? So what's this releasing versus retaining idea?
Yeah, so one thing as a community bank that we're able to do is when we sell those loans, we're able to retain the servicing on them, which means that borrower is going to make their payments to us. And that's a service that we'd like to be able to offer to our community. Sometimes you could have a mortgage banking operation. They have a warehouse line that's limited, right? They have to be able to sell that loan right away so they can get that money back and be able to sell it, lend that money out to another borrower. The different, there's a price difference to it too, right? A lender or somebody that's going to buy that loan, they're going to pay you more for that servicing because there is a value to it. And that's where, something like a sub-servicer comes in handy as well, right? You could say, hey, you're not going to make your payments to us, but you're definitely going to make your payments to them, right? It's something that you can, you're able to have that extra layer of comfort with the borrower. And something that like we're able to offer is say, hey, if anything does go wrong, you're going to have that communication with us. We're going to do what we can to help you out. Whereas if that loan is sold elsewhere, can't make that promise. So it's kind of, there's some differences, but like obviously selling it, servicing, released, they're going to pay you more for that, which does help, in mortgage banking operation, when they sell that loan, gives them some extra cushion to be able to sell that next loan.
So I think that those comments are perfect to kind of ask Pete some questions, because you just made the observation that servicing is I'm thinking that it's a lucrative business to be in, but it also sounds like it might not be for everybody, right? It might not be something that every outfit is trained up to do, and that's why you might be looking to release some of those files out to a servicer. And Pete, I think that would be your space, right? Can you explain why why do some organizations not want to do their own servicing, or maybe they don't have the ability to?
Yeah, I think, Zach, that's a key point at the end, is having the ability to. To add to what John is saying, he put it really well, but it's at the end of the day, it's a decision of, do you want that cash now? Oh, there's multiple decision points. Do you want the cash now versus are you willing to wait it out? Because the value of the servicing rights, they'll pay out, but it's over a period of time, because you're collecting that interest over, let's say, 8 years, 10 years, 30 years. It depends on how long you expect that loan to be on your books. And then there's also fees that you can recapture throughout that period. So but at the same time, like John is saying, you've got lenders who need that cash right away to go turn around and lend out to somebody else. So they'll just sell off the servicing rights. The other consideration is the relationship piece, because when you retain servicing, and especially if you service yourself, like John's talking about, that they do at Newtown, you maintain that relationship. So not only do you get more control, more interaction with your borrowers, but you're able to perhaps market other products. So if Newtown were to say do auto lending, they can then advertise to those borrowers because they're still their borrowers. And then when it comes time for the borrower to refinance or to go buy another home, they're going to come back to their lenders. So the same thing in Norcom. Norcom wants to maintain that relationship with their borrowers throughout they call it the mortgage life cycle, which is originations all the way through the time that loan pays off. But then, there is a consideration there for capacity, which is why where subservicers come into play. Because if a lender like Norcom wants to retain the servicing rights, but doesn't want to necessarily hire staff to perform all the functions necessary to service that loan, they can then go and rely on a subservicer who does all that work, and they can do what's called private label or white label, where they would service those loans under, let's say, Norcom's brand or their name, or they can do it non-white label or private label, where they just service it under, let's say, Cenlar is a big one out there, a subservicer. So, Cenlar might service the loan as Cenlar Bank, but they could also at the same time service it as Norcom. And so Cenlar has the operations and the operational efficiency to be able to service those loans at a better cost than, say, a Norcom, who might, and sorry to pick on Julie, but maybe they've got, let's say, 10,000 loans in their servicing book, whereas Cenlar right now is going to be servicing probably 2.5 million loans. So they've got the efficiency because they service so many accounts to be able to handle these loans not only cost efficiently, but from a process standpoint, they've got the technology to do it. Whereas Julie's team may not want to go out and make the investment to build out a servicing team and do it all in-house. I kind of took you on a roundabout response. John.
There's a lot there. And one of the things that you mentioned that I found myself wondering about is the white labeling piece of it.
Mhm.
So from the consumer's perspective, the borrower, when you have a sub-servicer in the mix and there's a white labeling agreement, in other words, let's just say, so UCLS's name isn't going to be all over everything, but you're going to be on the other end of the line servicing the loan. Do you work to try to have a seamless experience for that borrower? Like that borrower may not have any idea that they're talking to a sub-servicer, right? They just think, I'm talking to Norcom.
Yep. If you have a private or white label relationship with your client, so in this case, the client would be Norcom, the sub-servicer would be UCLS. The intent of that servicing agreement or arrangement would be for that borrower to never know that they're not talking to somebody at Norcom or at Newtown Savings or whoever the client is.
Imagine that, in the life cycle of a loan, that might be more important than what meets the eye, especially if the ride's a little bumpy for a borrower, I could imagine that to a borrower, having that sense of consistency is really important. I just remember in the foreclosure crisis, one of the complaints that consumers were always talking about was, every time I call in and speak to somebody, I'm always talking to someone new and they don't know the conversation that I had with the last person. And so I'm just wondering, how do you deal with that? How does that work out in practice?
Well, that goes back to, it's partly technology, maintaining a strong system of record, but it's also relying on your people so that every time the borrower calls in or speaks to somebody or there's any changes on the account, that's notated correctly so that the next time that borrower calls in, they're likely not going to speak necessarily to the same agent, but that agent will have all the information right there in front of them. So you want your systems to be easy to use for your people, not just the borrowers who are accessing through maybe an online portal, but for the people internally who are going to be speaking to the borrowers. You want them to be able to have easy access and readily available information so they can speak to the account and have the same information that the borrower would.
Julie, I saw you go off mute. You got something to add?
Yeah, I have some questions for Peter. So 2 questions. If I called in and you're the sub-servicer, I don't know, I'm just calling Norcom, where do you have agents? Are they all over the country? Are they just in the US? Where are your people?
Well, depending on the sub-servicer, they should be. I believe every sub-servicer's call center or borrower-facing personnel will all be onshore. So they would all be in the US, but where in the US they are, that's going to be dependent on a lot of factors. I can tell you UCLS, we are based out of Rocky Hill, Connecticut, but we will have agents all over the country. And part of that is out of necessity and part of that is strategy. So we're going to be a national servicer, so we will have borrowers on the West Coast, and because of the regulations that dictate how or what times we can call different borrowers in different parts of the country, we need to have people available in different time zones. But also because there's, if in this world that we live in now where people can work from anywhere, if we're going to go after the as much talent as we can get, that talent's going to be spread out all over the place, because as smart as we like to think we are in Connecticut, there are smart people outside of Connecticut too. So, but anytime those borrowers call in, especially to go back to that white label, private label arrangement, you do want to make that that as seamless as possible. So all the letters that go out, they would all say Norcom. All the calls, every time the borrower calls in, it would be, thank you for calling Norcom Mortgage. How can I help you? When your credit report comes out, it should report as Norcom. It should, you know, there's a lot of things that go into it, and I can tell you from experience, it doesn't always go as smoothly or as seamlessly as we would all like, but that is the goal. And if the subservicer is doing things correctly, that borrower should never know who that subservicer is.
Perfect. If we have time for one more question, I was curious, how do lenders board their loans to you? Is this all through, what do you guys use?
Usually it'd be direct through your LOS, your loan origination system. So, you know, I think you guys are on Encompass, if I'm not mistaken. And that would tie into whatever servicing platform your subservicer is using. And that's all set up, you know, in advance, so that it's generally a pretty smooth transition from the time that loan closes and all the information gets sent over to the servicer. It's already connected, or the systems are already connected, so that information comes over pretty easily.
Great.
So I'm just looking at the time. We got 3 minutes left, and I feel like we could just easily keep on going. But you know, maybe this is a good time to just open it up and ask if there are any final questions, you know, from the group. Any questions?
Sure, I'll throw one in there. I happen to be working on, John, you're kind of talking about, you guys were talking about the secondary market kind of concept, and, you know, having loans be compliant. And I know, Julie, you touched upon it too. I'm dealing with a lot of these issues. So just to back up, I'm Erin, I work with CADIC, and I'm an agency advisor. So I deal directly with the real estate attorneys. And I just happen to be working on a couple of requests from lenders, no lenders of which are on this call today, that some of my agents received, looking for policies that they never received, title policies, or an endorsement to a policy. And, you know, my attorneys will come to me and say, hey, I already sent this stuff. It's really hard for me to go backtrack. You know, we're so busy. I just don't have time to go back and look for all these things. Can you help me out? So a lot of times we'll jump in, we'll try to pull the policy together and then send it off to the lender. I guess my question, a couple questions coming out of this, and again, this is kind of for selfish purposes, but helps to kind of better understand the dynamic. One are, what's up?
There's no time like the present. This is a great moment.
One are, when a loan is, you know, going to be sold on the secondary market, are all the regulations kind of standardized about who's looking for what? And I guess the reason I'm asking that is, you know, is it sufficient that you know, for instance, a title insurance policy have an electronic signature? Can it be a scanned copy? Does it have to be original? Kind of what are the standards when it comes to that space?
So typically what will happen is you'll have your agency guidelines, and then most other investors that you'll find, what they'll do is they'll basically abide by those same guidelines, and then maybe have a few overlays. So as long as you understand the main agency guidelines, for the most part you're covered, and then you just have to make sure you double check those overlays that they have. And most loans don't really enter into that space. They're usually outlier situations. But yeah, that's usually what happens, is the guidelines are typically very similar, at least from a conforming standpoint. You know, if you enter maybe like a jumbo space, those guidelines get a little trickier because the agencies don't cover that area. So there's less of a baseline or a guideline to go by. So in that case, you may have a particular investor who has their own guidelines, and then maybe you have a second one who has their own. But what you try to do is find a balance between them, and then see where their overlays are, or even set your own to make sure you never even enter that space.
Yeah. Because I think the struggle I see with some of the attorneys, you know, are saying, all right, some lenders every lender is so different in a sense of what the requirements are, how you transmit documents. It's really hard to kind of get into a groove and be efficient at something. Or if CADIC's looking at saying, hey, can we have our agents send these title policies out electronically? That's
Yeah.
tricky, right, Zach? Because, you've got to provide for all different kind of situations.
And I've
Yeah,
seen
I mean-
that, I've seen multiple sides of that as well, where, some lenders will say, hey, we want you to do the title commitment while it's still in underwriting. We're not even going to guarantee that it's a loan yet, and we want you to go pull title.
Yeah.
Or we want that closing package, right after it closes, before the rescission period is over, before it even disperses. And other lenders will say, no, we don't want it. We don't want it until after it disperses. And a lot of that is based on other strategies as well. Maybe you have a lender who wants to sell that loan the second they get it in. They're not even going to look for any deficiencies. Or maybe they're going to take their time, do a full thorough review on it before, so they're not really in any rush to get that information. And a lot of it is based on, the own efficiencies that they've created in their operations procedure, or in their, their hedging policy or secondary market policies as well.
Yeah.
Just to make a quick comment on that, Aaron, you're right. I think that my observation about the title space, the title post-closing space, is that by the time everything gets to us, we and our title agents have to adjust to whatever process the stakeholder who wants something from them is using. And it could be, like Aaron's saying, it could just be all across the board, which makes it challenging. I think that there's some collaborations going on right now between the American Land Title Association and the National MBA that are really intended to bring more uniformity and standardization to the entire workflow, from origination to post-closing. And we'll see. I hope that we do get a little bit more standardization, because maybe it'll help check all those boxes in post-closing.
Yeah, that'd be nice.
Aaron, you have any other questions?
No, I'm good.
Okay. Anyone else? Those are great questions. I see we're at a little past 11. So I want to thank the panel. Great job, everybody. This was engaging discussion. I learned a lot, and thank you for showing up, everybody, and having this discussion with us. And it looks like it's been recorded. So if anybody knows anyone else that would benefit from this, please encourage them to watch the recording when it's available. But thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank
Well
you,
done,
Zach.
Zach.
Yeah,
Everyone,
very well
thanks,
done.
Zach.
Thanks
Thanks a
for
lot.
Great day,
Yeah,
everyone.
take care.